if you're going to have a show like this, you got to have somebody that has the historical perspective. And, we like to bring them on for a lot of different things, but I think today was a day that we had to have Marty Lurie on because no one knows this game. No one knows Bay Area baseball. No one knows the game of baseball, the history of it, the history of the A's, the history of the Giants, which Vida Blue is a big part of. He is a Bay Area radio Hall of Famer. The great Marty Lurie is with us here on A's Cast Live. It's a tough day, Marty, but I think we all knew Vida well enough that he'd want us to celebrate his life, and I think that's what we need to do today.
Well, that's what Vida did in his whole life. He celebrated it. He brought such magnetism to the room. When you look at the heart of those teams, and it's just what a lineup today. I don't know why I'm on with this lineup. This is amazing just to hear Joe Rudy talk. But Vida, what he did in 1971 sort of got everybody going because they turned into world champions. In 71, of course, they lost to the Orioles in the playoffs. But what Vida accomplished in 71 and the way he did it and the way he captured the whole country and the Bay Area and the team, he was the mega star. It wasn't Reggie, it wasn't Sal Bando, it wasn't Gene Tennis, wasn't Joe Catfish or any of those people in 1971. It was Vida Blue. And Vida Blue was just the part of this team that became nationally known. And then things happened after that where they won some World Series. Of course, a dynasty happened. But what Vida brought to the table was this authenticity that, wow, this guy is amazing. This is one of the best pitchers we've ever seen in our lives. And he's part of the Oakland A's. And then they went from there and, of course, won the championship. So for me, Vida brought something special to the ball club. When he came up in 1970, Chris, he threw a one-hitter against Kansas City. And he said, okay, how about the next game? A no-hitter against Minnesota. And that was 1970. So we couldn't wait to see this kid. And then he comes back in 71 and is just fabulous. Goes to the All-Star game and starts that game and all the comments about him like on Time magazine and this magazine and that magazine. He was a national treasure. And what gets me about him is that was the beginning of the Oakland A's dynasty when Vida stood up and said, hey, I'm the best in the world, and my team is the best too.
And it's tough to tell the younger crowd because magazines are not a big deal. But back in those days, when you're talking Time, you're talking Newsweek. Sports Illustrated, Baseball Digest, all that kind of stuff. I mean, he was on Ebony too, but Time and Newsweek, the circulation was so unbelievable. And to have him as a young African-American pitcher pitching for the Oakland A's on the cover, the name Vida Blue was unique. He became a household name. He was a star. I heard President Obama was talking about when he was growing up that all of a sudden, like, he was into baseball. And even though he was a White Sox fan, it was like Vida Blue. I mean, when you have the president of the United States talking about, I grew up a big Vida Blue fan, for everything that's going on in our Oakland world, I think it's hard for people to realize how big of a star, a household name, no cable television, no internet, no social media, and he was a bona fide American sports star.
Well, and not only that, but he put Oakland on the map. Don't forget the ball club got here in 1968. So it's 1969, 1970, they're getting a little bit better. And then in 1971, he put Oakland on the map. Who knew about the Oakland A's at that point? But in 71, they win the division, and Vida Blue was the star. He was the national star of this ball club. And I'll look, if you went to games, and I got to the Bay Area in May of 1972. Now, of course, Vida has the dispute, the holdout with Charlie Finley at that point. And, Charlie says, well, I'm not going to sign you. And Vida says, all right, I'm going to sell plumbing supplies. So now he's not playing for half the season. Yeah, that's what he said. It was crazy. It was crazy. Now, here's Vida Blue in the season he comes off of, and Charlie's not going to pay him. All right. So meanwhile, he then gets signed, and now he's going through a spring training, whatever it is, and now he's getting ready to pitch. Well, Charlie would have these half price nights on Monday night, and you'd have like 50,000 people there. And I think I can remember maybe the first game I ever went to at the Oakland Coliseum, and it had to be the summer of 1972. I went to see Vida pitch, and it was 50,000 people there. 50,000 or 40,000, whatever the capacity was, it was filled up. And I sat down the right field line. The sun was in my eyes. I was right by the foul pole on the second deck in the right field line, that little part of the deck that went over onto the field. Couldn't see anything, but I couldn't wait to get to the park for the electricity and the excitement of Vida Blue. And that's how I got initiated into Oakland A's baseball in 1972. And then the big thing about Vida, people have to remember, 72 was kind of a lost year for him because he didn't have a spring training and he didn't obviously pitch very much during the year. But when they played the Tigers in the playoffs, it was a tremendous playoff. This is where Campy throws the bat at Laren LeGros and Billy Martin, and then, it's a crazy Willie Horton. The whole situation was nuts. Well, it came down to Game 5 in Detroit. They have Campy had to be with a police escort in the hotel, and it was just nuts. So Blue Moon gets the start in Game 5, and it's huge. This is to win the pennant, and it's in Detroit. And the place is going nuts because of the whole Campy Laren LeGros incident. Well, Blue Moon goes about 6 innings, and then he couldn't pitch anymore. The emotion of the moment overcame Blue Moon. He couldn't pitch. Well, who did they go to? Vida Blue. And that's when Vida Blue took the ball, bailed out Blue Moon, his friend, and went the remainder of that game and put the A's into the World Series, and the rest is history. But 72 for Vida, those innings that he pitched in Game 5 against the Tigers, maybe the biggest innings he pitched in his life.
Well, I just think of the historical part of his career, and you have to talk about the All-Star game, as the All-Star game back then really meant something. The country cared about the All-Star game. They cared who won the All-Star game. The players cared. It was National League versus American League. They were two different entities. The National League had its own president. The American League had its own president. They were different, and they were coming to play. And Vida Blue started the game as a. He started the game as a Giant. He won the game as an American League pitcher and a National League pitcher. So we could talk World Series awards. He also has his own All-Star history.
Well, the 71 All-Star game was unbelievable. You got to remember, Vida grew up in Mansfield, Louisiana, and his dad died when he was in high school. Vida was a great quarterback. He could have been a fabulous quarterback in those days. His grandfather used to sit on the porch and tell him about Jackie Robinson and about the integration of baseball and things like that. We're talking about Mansfield, Louisiana here. And Vida, when he got to pitch in 1971, there's some interviews with him about facing Willie Mays and facing Hank Aaron and facing Clemente. And Vida, just to hear his voice and know the pride he had and the honor he had of pitching for the American League against those players that he grew up watching and idolizing and understanding who they were and what they meant to the game was huge. And he went out and started that All-Star game as a 21-year-old. Unbelievable. It really is it's still one of the great moments of baseball history when you look at the lineups of those two teams and how many Hall of Famers were there. And of course, we remember the home run that Reggie hit off of Doc Ellis that not only went out of the stadium, but hit the transformer that was not down the line. It was in like right center field. That's how far Reggie hit it. He didn't pull it down the line because people did that. They knocked it out of Norm Cash, you hit it out and all that. But Reggie hit it in right center and hit the transformer. That ball would have gone, who knows, 550 feet, whatever it was. But it was a great game, and Vida started that game. And I know in his heart what it meant to him to be pitching against Willie Mays. And of course, he had heard so much about Willie from his family.
And by the way, happy birthday, Willie Mays. I mean, you talk about the greatest living player that we have. Was it happy 92?
Yep.
Amazing.
Yep. Yeah. 92 on Saturday. And again, like Vida, Philippe Lou taught me something and taught Ron Wotus something. And I talk to Will all the time, on the show on Sunday mornings. And he said, show me the man first, then the player. And I think that applied to Willie and that applied to Vida. They were exceptional men in their own way, in different ways of relating to the world. But they were amazing people. And then you look at what they accomplished in baseball. It's just beyond belief. For Willie, people ask me, what was the best thing about Willie? I think running the bases. Chris, if and I lived in Florida in the 1960s, and I didn't see Giant games on TV. They were at Candlestick. They put on games.
You didn't have the baseball package? You didn't have the app back in those days?
There was nothing.
You had to read? You had to read a book about this stuff?
You were lucky you got to see. If you were lucky, you got to see a game on Saturday. But you'd never see a game very rarely from Candlestick because of the time change and all that. So what I said to Willie, and I did so many shows with him, and he chose me to be his interviewer, which is the biggest honor, I think, of my life, that Willie chose me to do that. And we did a number of shows in front of thousands of people. And I said to Willie, were you any good? And he says, I was all right. And I said, okay. And so I said to myself, what did I remember about Willie? And it was the All-Star games. Willie Mays took over the All-Star game. He took it over. You watched it. He would lead off. He'd get a triple. He would steal a base. He'd hit a home run. It didn't matter. Walter Alston was the manager of the All-Star team. And he would say to Willie, what do you think about the lineup today? And Willie would say, Walter, lead me off, hit Hank Aaron second and Clemente third. And I don't care what you do after that. And that was the way Willie was. And, he gave Alvin Dark the signals of what pitches to throw from center field. He just took over a ball game, but it was his base running. I did a show with Harry Callis, remember, the wonderful broadcaster for the Phillies. And Harry worked with the Houston Astros in the 60s. And I said in those days, I was doing it for the A's, memories of the game. I did a memory of the game every show. And I had Harry on. I said, Harry, what's your favorite baseball memory? And he said it was Willie Mays and running the bases. That was what Harry Callis said to me. And this was probably in 2004, 3, somewhere in that range when I was doing those shows. So Willie just touched everybody he was dynamic with the power, the speed, the arm. He threw somebody out at home, Maury Wills, threw somebody out at third. This is the same game. And had to throw to second to get the runner on second, but Tito Fuentes dropped the ball. And otherwise, he would have had someone thrown out at just about every base. So that's what people think about Willie, and that's what they remember about him. But these two players, Vida, what he accomplished as 209 wins, and what he accomplished in 1971, and if it was a different time, different ownership, different union, different rights for the players, who knows what Vida would have accomplished. But Charlie really took the heart out of him by not paying him in 1972. And that's something I think that Vida still did regret for his whole life.
And you two did a famous video together.
Oh, yeah, boy, that is interesting. I got a text from Vince Cotroneo the other day.
Same thing from me, if you remember back.
Yeah. Let
me tell the story real quick. So I'm in Kansas City with the Raiders.
All right.
And we're I can't remember what time of the year it was, but so I'm in Kansas City. And obviously there is a little significance between my family and Jackie Robinson, as Jackie Robinson in his very first at bat grounded out my grandfather. And there's something about it in the Negro League Museum in Kansas City. And I've always wanted to go, and it's a Saturday. I got nothing to do, so I immediately go over. I'm at the Negro League Museum, and I'm going through that first part of the timeline of it, right? And then all of a sudden I hear I hear two voices, and I'm looking around. I'm like, that's Marty Lurie. And then all of a sudden, it's that high pitch. I'm like, that's Vida Blue. And it's like weird. I'm like in Kansas City, and I'm hearing Marty Lurie. And I walk in this room, and there's this video that you guys do, and I immediately texted you, going, "I'm listening to you at the Negro League Museum in Kansas City."
I can't tell you how many people have done that. And the story was Crime of the Century. And it's a story of Lester Rodney, who was a sports writer who advocated for the integration of baseball in the 30s and in the early 40s. And he was never really recognized for what he did because he was the sports editor of the Daily Worker, the communist paper. And because of that, he didn't get the recognition from the other sports writers, but he was the one who pushed the hardest for the integration of baseball, Lester Rodney. And it's a great story. So they did a documentary about it, and they asked me to be the voice of Lester Rodney. So we had some of his columns that he wrote for the Daily Worker about why baseball should integrate challenging. Judge Landis, where are you? Baseball, why don't you grow up? Baseball, why don't you recognize African American players? These kind of columns. And I would read from the column. That was my voice for Lester Rodney. And Vida was the voice of Satchel Paige. So we would go back and forth, and they would tell the story. And that's how the video came together. But it plays at the Negro League Museum. It is on a loop there, and I can't tell you how many people have heard it. And again, when I think of all the things that have happened in my life around baseball, there's so many honors. That's right up there with the biggest honor as well. Being chosen to be the voice of Lester Rodney. I said, why me? They said, well, he was from New York. You're from New York. You love baseball. He loved baseball. And I got to meet Lester Rodney. I did a nice interview with him, and I played it on the A's show. I did so many interviews, but that was a good moment. That was a nice moment.
I think about Vida as he got older, and Vida did a lot of television, did a lot of radio,
Yeah.
and you can speak to this. A lot of the people that he worked with, Vida Blue was just an older player that they kept hearing about. He won the MVP, won the Cy Young, he won the World Series. And somehow that can really ruffle older players when they're working with younger people who didn't see them play. They don't know about their greatness. Vida was so generous and kind, even with the young people who really didn't know how great he was. Just talk about as he got older and he started to do TV, and he was great on TV because he's Vida Blue. He had charisma. He had the great sense of humor. People don't mention that enough. He had an outstanding sense of humor, but he was just always so cool to everybody when a lot of older players that might have kind of ruffled their feathers that they're working with these young people who really don't know how good they were.
No, he never big leagued anybody.
Oh,
That's it. He never big leagued anybody. He was genuine. He was a genuine person when we met. I met him first in 1987 when I was doing Giants Vision. I was programming the board in 1987, going from court in a suit to candlestick, doing this stuff. I had played softball with the people who ran Giants Vision, and I got to meet Vida. And one of my favorite pictures is Vida with my son Evan, who's about 9 years old at that point, and Ev's sitting there, and Vida's got his arm around him, and just a big happy feeling of the two of them in that picture. You could tell how genuine Vida was and how excited Evan was to be in a picture with Vida, and that's who he was. It just didn't matter who you were. He would kid around. He did the ad for me for Nations on the show. Of course, you know that. And Nations would give out these little certificates, for free hamburger, free strawberry pie, whatever. And I'd give him the Vida, and then he would turn around and give them the kids. He would give them to other people, and that's what he did. There was just a real feeling. You know how you talk to people and sometimes you talk to them and they're looking through you? and they're not really engaged with you in the moment. He was engaged in the moment with you. Whenever you talked with him, you were engaged with him. Raf does my show like Cody does yours. Cody does a fabulous job, and Raf would be there, and Vida would come into the studio, and Raf is a big Chicago Bears fan, and Vida would go, "Hey, how about your Bears today?" And he was always something. There was a guy in the gym who talked too much, and Vida said, "We're going to call you the mayor from now on." There was just he didn't. If you didn't tell me Vida Blue was a major leaguer, I wouldn't know it. I wouldn't know it. But he was a major league person, and that's what I'll always remember about him.
I had a conversation with him one time, because basically Vida was so unique being a star, and that he starred for the A's and the Giants. But later on, everything was really, he worked for the Giants. He worked around the Giants. I know there was a part of him, and we had that conversation. It did hurt that the A's way back when didn't celebrate their former players, especially from the 70s, because really all that should have been done on the other side of the bay. He was a 3-time World Series champion, the MVP, the Cy Young, the All-Star game. All of his true greatness was really with the A's. I know, and I'm not trying to divide A's versus Giants or anything. It's just I know that kind of bugged him that later on everything wasn't about A's. Everything he did was just Giants.
Well, it's the way the A's marketed in those days, and I've said this so many times. You think about a fantasy camp. How about going with Raleigh Fingers and Joe Rudy and Sal Bando and Campy Campaneris and Catfish and Ken Holtzman? I mean, think about it. Those were mega, mega, mega stars. The history of the A's franchise in early years of Oakland in the 70s are mega stars. The Giants did not have people like that. The Giants celebrated Mays, McCovey, Marichal, Perry, Cepeda. They were gone in the 60s, but these guys took over in the 70s, but the A's never quite marketed them properly. I would love to be in a fantasy camp with those guys, and I was.
No doubt.
I was. I mean, to be there, I never understood why the A's couldn't market their history better than they did. It was just a crime, honestly, that they didn't.
But I do think what we do now that we finally, we just honored 72, 73, and I was so happy now that Vida's passed, just to think, it wasn't just a few weeks ago, we honored the 73 team. The fact that he got to be with his brothers, his teammates one more time before he passed, for them and for him. I know he was sick. He was not doing well, but it meant so much for Vida one last time to be with these guys.
It was huge. It was huge. And I haven't seen Vida for a while and haven't talked to him for a while. But through Bill Lasky, I would hear how Vida was doing. I knew he was very, very, very sick. And for him to show up and to be part of 1973, he had lost a lot of weight. He was probably down to 140, 150 pounds at that point. But to be there and be part of that celebration was fabulous. And just to see some of the pictures and to hear your description with Cody of when Vida and Reggie hugged, it was chilling for me to hear it. Gave me goosebumps to hear it. So those are the moments of life where baseball, we are a community. We're a family. Everything that goes on within the world of baseball touches everyone. This is our community. Vida Blue was a major part of our community, and to see how the community has embraced him now and has supported everyone who has such grief about his passing is wonderful. And then to hear how the community of his friends and teammates embraced him on that day makes it all worthwhile. That's who we are. We're a baseball community, no matter what happens.
Yeah, and at 3:00, I did a sit-down interview with him, which I think is probably his last sit-down official interview. We're going to play it at 3:00. People will be able to watch it, listen to it. Such a special man. Well, you know how much you've meant to my career. You know what you've meant to the A's fan base. You know what you've meant to the Giants fan base. I mean, I think it's bigger than that. I think it's what you've meant to the entire Bay Area baseball fan base, because there's the people that remember AAA baseball and what baseball used to be like, and the history of the Giants and the Dodgers in New York, or the A's in Kansas City and Philadelphia. You've been really the only one on a regular basis for all these years to have the answers, to have the interviews, to have the thoughts. What you've meant to Bay Area baseball. What's why you got a bobblehead, and it's why you're a Bay Area Radio Hall of Famer. What you've meant to all of us means so
Well,
much.
it's very kind of you to say that, and no one has done more for A's radio, TV, information for the fans than you. And I've told you this for years. And I did shows from 1998 through 2009. I was on every single day, producing my own show, doing my own thing. But no one can come close to what you've done, of continuing the story of the Oakland A's under all sorts of circumstances. You've never wavered, and you've shown your love for baseball. So you're really the guy, Chris. You're the guy of the moment, and you got your pitch. You didn't miss it, and the A's are so lucky to have you there. They really are.
I got to tell you, that means a lot. That means a lot.
Oh, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. There is no one who's in, and I listen to you after a game, and you and the captain kick it around, and it could be the most miserable game in the world. And then you come
Yeah.
on, and I call the captain, Ken Corrick, the captain, because he took over for Bill King. When Bill died, Ken had to step up. He had to be the captain of the ship. So I call him the captain. But to listen to you guys make sense of a game for the fans and not complain about this and that, but to talk baseball with an uplifting voice, and Ken with his voice, I think it's a highlight for me. I almost wait for that part, for when he can be with you to recap the game. And you bring that to the table, Chris. And there's no one. I've been around A's baseball for 50 years. I worked as hard as I could from 1996 to 2009 with the A's, for the A's, doing all the shows, but nobody comes close to the heart of what Oakland A's baseball like you. And it's really pretty special, man. Pretty
Well, as
special.
you know, it's whether the times we're in now. I mean, all the years, all the stations, all the drama, and everything that's going on now. It's hard not to be emotional. I mean,
You've been
it's not easy, as you know. It's really
there.
not to do it every day, and try and keep it in between the lines and the players, and there's a lot that goes into it. I don't think people really understand.
No,
So
no,
your
they'll
words are
never
very kind.
understand that. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And they'll never understand what it is to put these shows together and make sure someone shows up on time to have your content ready, because it's entertainment. And to be able to come on with that enthusiasm, because that's what baseball is. People want to know they're going to go to the game with a friend. And that's what you bring to this broadcast. When Cody calls or you call and say, "What would you like to be on?" Absolutely, because I'm talking baseball with a friend. And that's what the great broadcasters can do, the great people in baseball can do. It keeps us together because we enjoy it every day. Every day we get another game, it's another story. But I get to do it with you, or I get to listen to Ken. And it's huge to be able to do that. And folks should understand it is not easy to do it. I've been doing it for 27 years, and I'm telling you, it's my own show, and I got to book the guests and get the guests and do the whole thing, set up the equipment and all that stuff. And it was crazy, but we do it because we love the fans. I like the fans, and you like the fans too. I love when you talk to the fans and they call up. You like the fans. I like getting the calls. I like to talk to the fans. And that's what you bring to the table also. And they're lucky, Chris. They're lucky to have you. And you have the baseball roots. Your grandfather, MVP of the National League, Bob Elliott, in 1947. He was a Pacific Coast League star. He was a World Series star with the Boston Braves. And I mean, come on, with that background, you better live up to it.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend. You be well.
Anytime, you know that.